Testing. We are live. Hey everyone, how are you doing tonight? So good to see y'all. So good to see everyone tonight. Welcome. So I don't know who all knows this. Some of you know this. So today, my baby's 3 weeks old. And he didn't sleep last night. and so I'm a little tired, but we have a great event planned for you this evening. We've got some phenomenal leaders who are going to be sharing about their experience, their lesson learned, everything around employee experience. How do you attract, retain best people? We have a lot of leaders here in the room tonight, and we have a couple hundred people who are attending virtually all around the world. So this is a really special evening. Thank you for coming out. We're super excited. I wanted to first introduce myself. My name is John Duisberg. I'm one of the co-founders of Cool Leaf with Prem Bhatia, my co-founder, and Sarwar, other co-founder. So, and we have our whole team here. We flew everybody in. And I wanted to shout out two people because we like to celebrate at Cool Leaf. So yesterday was Thomas's 1 year work anniversary. Where are you at, Thomas? He's over there. Okay. And yesterday also was Brandy's first day. Where's Brandy? Okay. So we like to celebrate. All right. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background about the Great Retention. Okay. So the vision, how all this all came together. About a year ago, everyone was talking about the buzzword, the Great Resignation, right? People leaving their company for different reasons, kind of a negative kind of conversation. And because of the work that we do at Cool Leaf around employee recognition, engagement, experience, we get to see these awesome things that are happening, that leaders are doing with their employees and kind of elevating that top workplace culture, but no one's talking about it. And so we decided, hey, we're going to put a spotlight on these really great things that are happening and share those stories. Right? And so the Great Retention, the podcast was born, and we interview different executive leaders to share about their experience, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. Right, Seth? And so today we have some great leaders who are going to be sharing about their experience as well. But our vision is this becomes a movement. This becomes a community, right? That you can learn from other leaders to become a better leader for yourself, but to take these ideas and be able to apply it inside of your own organization, right? And so that's a little bit about the vision and the background for the Great Retention. And we're live, so we're streaming again all over. And so we're super excited to host you all here today. So I'm going to go ahead and invite our speakers up, Jeff, Donald, and Katie. And please give them a warm welcome. Cherie, good to see you. And we're going to get into it. And there's also going to be questions that, for the audience that we'll have time for. So, please be thinking of those good, hard questions for Jeff. All right. And so we're going to start off just by doing intros. And so we'll do intros, and we'll start with you, Katie, and just if you don't mind, just share a little bit about your leadership role, about Salesloft, the organization, and then we'll pass it to Jeff and to Donald here.
Yeah, so excited to be here with all of you tonight. I'm Katie. I lead the HR and people team at Salesloft. We're headquartered here in Atlanta. We have about 950 employees. 150 of those people are in London. We have roughly 75 in Mexico. And then we just opened our Singapore office a few months ago, and we've got about 10 employees in Singapore. So that's what Salesloft looks like today.
Awesome. Jeff.
Yeah, that is just crazy to me, because a couple of years ago, I used to come to this office and visit Kyle in his there were like 4 of them.
Yep.
Doing like sales email. Actually, at that time, it was like LinkedIn scraping. tool, and I actually was one of their first clients. So it's amazing to think how big you are now. So that's awesome. For the past 5 years, I've been in a company called ParkMobile. Does anyone have the ParkMobile app? Awesome. Anyone know the zone number for Ponce City Market? That's 222. A lot of people like Ponce City Market here. That's awesome. Yeah. So ParkMobile started in Atlanta. I think one of the great tech stories here. This year, we hit the 40 million user milestone. So one of the biggest apps. We're actually I think we're number 3 in the navigation category of the App Store, only behind Google Maps and Waze. So a really great app. So when I joined, we had about 75 employees at the company. So decent size, kind of mid-sized business. When I left the company last month, we had about 225. So really amazing growth for that business. It was a super fun ride. And so, but growing from 4 people to almost 1,000, growing from 75 to 225, it's a lot of growing pains when you go through that transition.
Absolutely. And Donald.
Nice. Well, first I'll say hi to all the people there on LinkedIn, just because there's so many different stories now around borderless environments and hybrid work, and making sure that we engage those folks as well. My name is Donald Knight. I have the pleasure of being the Chief People Officer for Greenhouse Software. Many of you have probably received jobs because of our software. It's a hiring software company. We're a distributed company, so a little shy of 1,000 folks, roughly around 850. And we're very much people first. So I'm super excited about that. I also see a few greenies in the audience, one of which is Nia Darville, who leads our inclusion, diversity, equity, and allyship efforts as one of our leaders on that team. And she and I were just in Boston last night facilitating some great vulnerable conversation and connection with some of the Greenhouse folks there. So the fact that she was willing to make the flight back to Atlanta and still make this event, I want to just give you a shout out and say thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, Donald was emailing us at 35,000 feet in the air this morning, so asking about, so we're all coordinated. We all got the gray memo here, so. Okay, so we're gonna jump in with some questions. Katie, I'm gonna start with you here, and pretty much every leader I talk to, they all agree, culture is the glue, right? The foundation, right? And I hear leaders talking about they want to create a winning culture, okay? So they want to create a winning culture. And so I want to ask, one, what does that mean to you as a people leader? What does that mean, winning culture mean in Salesloft? But also, we've got a tough macro environment right now, right? So, there's uncertainty, there's layoffs. So how do you navigate these macro conditions but stay true to your core when it comes to winning culture?
Well, I think the first thing is that culture is not the ping pong table in the office, and it's not the free lunches that so many of us used to have. Many of us don't even have offices anymore to have that. So I think first you have to define your culture. And for us, our culture is our values and how we live them out. It's everything from how we win together, how we lose together, how we have conflict together, which is just as important, if not more important, than how you win together. So all of those things are what we consider make up culture. We have our 5 core values, and it is a filter for so many of the decisions we make as a business. We define a winning culture as attracting and retaining the top talent. I view that as what my team is responsible for and where we spend a lot of our time, and it's something that we constantly have to redefine, whether it's COVID and we're no longer in the office together, or we're shifting and are going through the macroeconomic environment that we're in today. It's something that we constantly adapt and change to.
Yeah, and so a shout out to Cherie at Salesloft, because we did an interview and she's the executive leader of diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'm kind of doing a little riff here, but Cherie mentioned that that DEI strategy is a contact sport. And I feel like, that culture is a contact sport. You've got to, get in close and have those conversations. But I know that Salesloft is very intentional about the culture. So Jeff, Donald, talk to us about winning culture. What does that mean to you as a leader? Either one of you guys.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on, I kind I kind of hate the word culture because it's so generic. And to, like you said, like culture is not a cool office, or, a culture is like the way you treat each other, the way you treat your clients, the way the core values are so critical. So you can't really have a culture without strong core values. So that's kind of something I've really focused on with the teams, is that, what are our core values? And, different companies take different approaches to core values. And in the worst case, core values are just like super generic. They put them on the walls, and then nobody really kind of lives and breathes core values. But if the core values are really true to what the company is, they can be very powerful. And so, some things that we did at ParkMobile, we had 6 core values, and we truly made them part of the hiring process. We made them part of the who gets a bonus, who gets promoted, sometimes who gets fired. But because we really lived the core values, it infused into the way we operated as an organization, and thus it created the culture of the company. So I think defining your core values is probably the easy part of the process, but how you live those core values out day in, day out, how you make it really a part of the organization, that's what's really going to drive your culture.
Yeah, I would echo those same sentiments. I think when it comes to culture, it's constant, right? So it's something that you constantly have to like mind and nurture. I think the other thing I would say is like to your point, Jeff, around like people that may put values on the wall. Like we see this now with candidates, right? Like they're joining these organizations and they're finding out they've been catfished. They've joined an organization based on the values that they told them that they live out. And then once they join, they realize that's not the case, right? And so like to your point, I think you have to be values driven. I think ultimately though, it starts with the hiring process. So I love the fact that you stay true to Cool Leaf culture and you shout out people on their anniversary, shouted out people on their first day at Cool Leaf. To me, like I think it starts with hiring, and it's this idea around like how do you bake in on the front end of the process when you're bringing people on, and really like mine your shop and be very intentional around the cultural additions or enhancers that you're adding to your community. For me personally, I am a little bit biased. I know I probably shouldn't say that I'm biased, but I'm super biased because I know what ParkMobile and Salesloft do from an investment on their hiring, because they're both greenhouse clients. And so when they tell you, when Jeff says that it's actually baked into the hiring process around the values, I know, I can see it. I can go into the platform and see how they're baking that in. But I believe when you start to talk about like a winning culture, winning doesn't start once somebody starts. It actually starts when you're actually trying to recruit them from a candidate perspective.
I love that. It's the full employee experience, even before they start.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Jeff, I'm gonna navigate to a topic that you mentioned about how do you bring core values to life, okay? And every leader in this room and online, they've had to navigate this distributed teams, remote environment now, right? And so now you're hiring people, and they've never met anybody. Those things that you used to do, perhaps, well, it's not the same what you're doing anymore, right? And so how do you, at ParkMobile, what were some of the lessons learned, right? How did you bring those values to life, right? Or give us, any stories, good, bad, anything in between that you can share when it comes to distributed teams and still being able to create that winning culture.
Yeah.
But not using the word culture.
So we made some mistakes, I think, early on when everyone went home, because we were all 5 days a week in the office for the most part. 75% of our company is in Atlanta, 25% are in the field, mostly salespeople. But so we were kind of like a, butts and seats kind of culture. Like people were there, they liked to be there. It was really fun. We back pre-COVID, everyone kind of liked to be in the office, so that was great. But then COVID happened, and we're like, okay, we need to do everything we did in person on Zoom. And I think that was a huge mistake. And I will never go to another Zoom happy hour in my life, because it's the worst thing ever. But we did everything on Zoom. And I think a lot of companies did this because we were like kind of trying our best to recreate a great in-person culture virtually. And I think that the lesson learned there is you can't force a culture on Zoom. That there are things you can't do on Zoom that are that you can do in person. And so we learned after a year that nobody wants to go to Zoom happy hours. Nobody wants to do all these kind of Zoom, scavenger hunts and culture events. And luckily, we got to a point where things were reopening. And I think the most important thing that we found is even if you're not going to be in office all the time, even if people are going to work kind of hybrid, you got to get the team together a lot. And a lot could be once a month, it could be once a quarter, it could be more frequent. But when we started getting people back together in person, and sometimes it was for meetings, and sometimes it was for fun, more often than not for fun, we really saw sort of the culture that was drained by Zoom come back. And so I think the lesson was you got to get back together. And I know everyone's virtual and hybrid and distributed teams, but you got to bake into your budgets travel for people to come in and get together, because I just don't believe a great company and a great culture could be 100% remote where nobody gets to know each other. And like as evidence to that, almost all of our employee churn during COVID was people that had joined during COVID. And all of our retention were people that had been with the company pre-COVID and they had kind of drank the Kool-Aid and they kind of knew it. So it's a good sign that just being purely virtual is going to have a lot of challenges. So I think the big learning was that yes, give people the flexibility. I don't think companies are going back to 5 days a week in the office, but leaders, instead of just doing, assuming everyone's going to be in the office, you have to really be intentional about getting teams together in person, because that's what's really going to build up the culture.
Yeah, I love just from a leadership perspective, okay, we're going to build this into the budget. Right? That's part of it too. Katie, any thoughts in terms of the distributed teams and how you maintain that?
Our story is very similar to ParkMobile's. The majority of our employees were in Atlanta before COVID, in the office 5 days a week. A handful of people were distributed. But since being remote, we've seen a lot of the same things. What we lost was those serendipitous interactions that you would get when you just showed up every day at 8:45 and someone else did, and you guys got coffee at the same time. You really don't have a reason to interact, but you talk to them every day about their kids and their life, and you get to build those relationships. And so we looked at who does this best outside of workforces, because everyone's struggling with this and there's not a silver bullet. And one of the things that we looked at was actually religious organizations. They're great at building communities within their populations. And so we looked at how do they do that. And we started this program called Lofter Groups that is similar to what a lot of different religious organizations do, kind of a once a week Bible study or youth group or whatever that looks like. And they all have a different topic. There's a start time and end time. We have a different senior leader host them. And it's any topic from parenting, gardening, video games, professional development. I want to learn more about time management. I want to learn more about negotiation skills from our sales leader who's hosting one. And so it just gave a different population within the organization an opportunity to connect and build relationships. And some of them re-upped and now just have their own kind of informal groups. Our parenting group most of them are in Atlanta and they get together regularly in person once a month, but we've had other groups kind of start and stop over time. And so it's something we sponsor internally quarterly, and then employees have the opportunity to re-up or join a different one or take the next quarter off. And so that's one way we've found that has helped kind of build some of those serendipitous interactions that we've lost.
Donald.
Yeah, trying to make sure I'm very mindful. I reject the notion that people going into physical spaces means that they have quality relationship. I've seen companies where they force people into the organization or force them into a physical space, and there is no real relationship. The depth of connection is surface deep at best. And so I totally agree with what you're saying, Jeff, and around this idea around connection. I believe the connection has to happen, and that likely does happen in physical spaces, But I think what the pandemic has actually revealed, at least from my perspective, is the lack of intentionality behind leadership. And this idea that having physical proximity meant that we were going to have relationship. And that's not the case. I think if I did a case study on ParkMobile, which I haven't done yet, but I'm happy to do so, that it wasn't just the physical space that allowed ParkMobile folks to be retained through the pandemic, but what happened in those physical spaces. And part of the reason why I gave Nia a shout out is what we've been doing is like trying to figure out as a distributed company, like how can we be more intentional? When people experience Greenhouse, what do we want them to experience? Not just from the environment, but also from the level of conversation, the level of vulnerability. Like, what does that look like? And so like we've had greenies that we've brought together with this initiative called Gather At, where we take clusters of people geographically and we bring them together. But it's not just for the sake of having a social hour. It's not just for the sake of saying, hey, like, we're hosting this happy hour connect. And like, no, like the level of intention behind the conversation is taking people that have been there 7 years or even 7 days, and we're bridging a connection that just most workplaces don't have. So I agree with you on the connection. I just want to make sure that as leaders, like we have an elevated responsibility now more than ever to make sure that we're rather intentional. And people with disabilities would tell you that prior to the pandemic, they were yelling at organizations telling you that they can do these jobs from home. And people were saying, no, we can't make accommodations for you. But when able-bodied people went home, all of a sudden, now we can do work from home. And so even the level of allyship with them and being intentional around, if you can't make it to a physical space, how do I still make sure that you are afforded the same opportunity for connection? That to me has to be based or rooted in the level of intentions behind leaders.
One point to that, and because I totally agree, just forcing people to come into a space doesn't really do anything. Yeah. If anything, you could make people annoyed because they prefer not to commute in. But what we try to do, and really what we try to do with our leaders, was to say, hey, we're going to go back to the office a couple days a week. But when your teams come back to the office, we don't want to see people like sitting in cubes, heads down in spreadsheets, right? Like that's the worst thing, because then like I could do this at home now. I've proven for the last 2 years I could be at home and I could be in my spreadsheets. So your in-office days are actually your collaboration days, your at-home days, your heads down days, which is very different for a lot. But that's the kind of thing we try to get the leaders focus on and say, hey, make the most out of your in-office time with your team. You should be in meetings a lot of the day, and then when they're home, they could do their work. Do all their notes, do their Excel sheets.
So I want to pick up on this a little bit, Donald. So Greenhouse, 850 or so, almost 1,000 employees, all around the globe, right? Primarily distributed environment. And so what I wanted to get your insight on and a little bit about, being intentional, but also letting it be organic. You can't force it, right? But how do you maintain that authentic connection? Okay, how do you keep inclusion top of mind behind a Zoom screen, right? And so I hear you when you say it's intentional, but then I also hear you when, I can't just force it and say, okay, everyone, let's collaborate, right? And so what have you found at Greenhouse to find that balance?
That's a great question. And if Nia comes on stage and kicks me, that means I gave the wrong answer. I think one of the things that we subscribe to, though, is that most companies have a DE&I team of some shape or form. Some people even call them DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. At Greenhouse, like we subscribe to this idea because your point around inclusion through the screen, and like I keep thinking of this phenomenal new arbor, that's what we call our ERGs, but this new arbor that just launched this year called Trellis, which is for people with disabilities. And I think that community, the reason they were able to rally together is because we don't subscribe to diversity, equity, and inclusion being on the equal platform. We believe that inclusion happens when diversity, equity, and allyship are present. And the allyship piece is important because the allyship piece is the thing that says, if you're not in this physical space, we all still join a device, even if we decided to come into the office. The allyship says that we have prompts for people for them to understand the importance of putting your pronouns. So your pronouns are it's not a task, it's not extra homework, it's creating an environment for people who may not subscribe to what you may think are their default pronouns, feeling accepted in the environment when they show up to shared spaces. And so it's like this idea that every great idea starts with inclusion. And so I think that in itself is a shift in the market. And I've sat with enough CPOs recently that they were like, we're missing the mark on allyship. How do I get with your idea team and figure out how do I operationalize that at my company? So I think that's the first piece. I think the second piece though is like, I think Jeff, you did a really good job like talking about some of the learnings, right? And Katie, I know, has done this as well at Salesloft. It's like companies also have to be willing to omit when there's opportunities where hindsight 2020, we didn't get this right on the front end. And so I think when you look at like Greenhouse, for example, like we had offices that people were actually physically going into prior to the pandemic. But as a result of the pandemic, what it did is it accelerated this idea of like, why are we restricting ourselves on where we tap into great talent? Like, I mean, if you look at the headline today, like Mark Zuckerberg and like Facebook have like laid off almost 13% of their organization, right? And so does that mean that those folks are no longer worthy of great opportunities simply because they're not sitting in a state where you have an entity? And so like this idea around learnings around like, how do we really want to make sure we lean in on this opportunity that whether you're in a physical space or not in a physical space, that there's a place for you here at Greenhouse. There's a contribution you can make to our success as an organization and even our culture. And I think through that and having folks like Jamie Adasi, who leads our idea team, or people like Nia, who are advocates on our idea team, they continue to hold us accountable. We also subscribe to this idea that it's a shared responsibility. And so like, I have a responsibility if I'm in a space that is predominantly occupied by men and a woman is on the phone and she's zooming in, if you don't allow her the opportunity to speak, I will cut you off. Like legit will cut you off and say, hey, hold on, like you need to make sure that her voice is heard. And this idea is like, you gotta create oxygen in the room. Like if I did a show of hands right now, I won't do this because I don't want to offend any of your prior employers, but like there's people that have been working at places that are suffocating environments, right? And so like our role is like, how do we create as much oxygen in the room for everybody in the room? And so like that's how we are able to hold each other accountable, whether in person or remote.
Love it. Love it. Let's create some oxygen. Katie, so you mentioned a little bit about lofter groups, right? So talk to us about, and I think you mentioned that you do them quarterly. So talk to us a little bit about how that helps create inclusion, how that creates connection, or am I making an assumption that that is part of that overall connection strategy?
Yeah, no. So we created the Lofter groups to build connection. We realized that's what we were missing. And it's part of exactly what Jeff and Donald both talked about. We used to all be together all the time, and it's some of that organic, but also deep relationship pieces that you need to have a high-performing team. So we looked at building connection a lot of different ways. We also took our whole company to Mexico last fall. We can talk about that separately.
My whole team is looking at me.
Full story.
Here we are.
We got you guys. So we looked at how do we bring people together in person and how do we continue to build relationships remotely. And so our back to work strategy is intentionally hybrid. So we still have our physical offices. We have one in Atlanta, one in London, one in Guadalajara, Mexico, and one in Singapore. And those are our hiring hubs, but we still hire people dispersed. And employees have the option to be in person as many times as they want, to come in a couple of days a week, or never to come in person unless there's some event or reason for them to do so. And so our strategy has been to adapt to different ideas that and different programs that allow them to connect however they want to. So the Lofter groups, for example, there are in-person Lofter groups, there are remote Lofter groups. We have regular sync weeks. So once a quarter, our entire executive team gets together which is a natural time for them to bring in their leadership teams or their teams. And you see the group that is in Atlanta that maybe doesn't come into the office all the time because they don't want to commute. They show up and we offer lunch again. And it's fun to just see people. Food works. Food brings people together. But it's fun to see different ways to bring people together. And I think it is about intentionality that Donald mentioned. You have to have that intentionality and create different avenues for people to connect.
No, I love it. Jeff, any story at ParkMobile about what went wrong? Or maybe what went well, but when it comes to how did you create that connection? How did you keep inclusion top of mind in this remote environment?
Yeah, I mean, for us, because I assume there's a lot of people in people culture, HR people here, but really it's got to go up to the top. And so, we were very intentional with our whole leadership team that we were making sure we were reaching out to our people. Because one of the important things that we figured out, during COVID with our teams was that, like in any organization, you have people that index high on introvert and people index high on extrovert, right? And so like during COVID, the introverts were like living best life, right? They're like, they're at home, at ParkMobile, we have a lot of software developers. So it's like during the day, there was a lot of video game playing, and then at night they would do the work. And we knew this was going on, right? So we were cool with it because, I mean, the year, like 2020, we had one of our most productive years ever as an organization. We launched more product releases, we won more deals. So like the team kind of like earned the right to work remotely. Like they did great work, they were very productive. But as a leadership group, we were thinking, are we doing our team a favor by just letting them work from home? Because you think about the value of being with people, being with your team, and the things you can learn from your peers that when you're actually together, especially if you're more introverted. Like extroverts don't care. They'll go, they'll come to the office. They're happy to be in the office. They go to happy hours. But the thing we worried about from an inclusion was the people that were more introverted. Generally, the software development team. That was the team that we were very concerned about because we were like, it's not healthy if we let these guys stay at home, stare at code all day. Like we have to drag them back into the office. And so with our development team, it was very controversial because they were so mad because they didn't want to come back into the office because they have the super comfy gaming chair at home and they don't have that at the office. So it was like, but we made them come back in the office. And I think it was, and some people said, not for me, I'm going to leave. And we were cool with that. But we felt it was an obligation to our people that we really said, hey, if you're going to be a part of this team, you got to be here with us for some of the time. And I think that really worked. And I think for the culture, it really paid off for the culture that we created a true hybrid. And we didn't just let everyone work from home and we got people back in the office. And I do think for the people that were the more introverted, I think it did help them. And it's going to help them both at their career at ParkMobile, and it helps them after because they'll have better social skills. They'll have more. They'll kind of know what it's like to work in an office because you don't know at your next company if you're going to be hybrid or not.
Yeah, I love the different perspectives, right? And it's not that there's a right or wrong. It's you're navigating this inside of your team. I love, Donald, what you said about making sure there's oxygen in the room, right? And keeping that top of mind. So 2 more questions, and then we're going to open it up. So be thinking of your questions, Casey. So I'm going to start with you here, Katie. So Salesloft has, to your point, Jeff, has grown from a small crew here in the Atlanta Tech Village to 1,000 people, London, Mexico, Singapore now. So you've grown really fast. And I know that the values, the culture is super important. And so what are you doing to develop this next generation of leaders within Salesloft so that they understand how special those values, this culture, this entrepreneurial spirit is, so that doesn't, you don't lose that, right? As a founder, I don't want to lose that, right? So what are you doing to invest in this new generation of leaders?
There's a couple things that we've done. As Jeff mentioned, when we were 4 people or 10 people and still an ATV, everyone had access and relationships and regular conversations with our 2 founders. And they were really the culture carriers. They were the drivers of organizational health, which was awesome. As we got bigger and we hired more and more people, it's natural that you lose some of that connection to your founders and even to your executive team. And that's something that we've been challenged with more recently is we've hired 400 people in the last year and grown so quickly, and we're remote, we're global. It's hard to continue some of those relationships. So we've really prioritized 2 things. One is our onboarding program, and then 2 is our leadership development program. So when we think about orientation, it is completely virtual. The spirit of our orientation is lightning in a bottle. How do we bring back that first day feeling when you were in person? How do we indoctrinate them into our culture and help them understand what are the priorities at Salesloft? How do we work together? We talk about the values. We talk about why they're important. They already know that coming in. Just like ParkMobile, we have a core values interview baked into our interview process. So they see that, they know that when they come in, and we reinforce it. The other thing we do is with our leaders, our frontline leaders to our executive team. Every new manager, whether they're promoted internally or hired externally, first-time managers to 20 plus years of experience go through the same program. It is our leadership development program, 6 months. The first 2 days are in person, and it's where we talk about all of our leadership philosophies, all of the things our 2 co-founders set the company up with from the beginning. We talk about 5 dysfunctions of a team, radical candor, how to have hard conversations, how to have a one-on-one. You'd be surprised at how many leaders don't know how to have a one-on-one, how to run a team meeting. Here's how to lead the Salesloft way and what we expect of our leaders. And then we reinforce those same principles over the next 6 months. They meet once a month virtually. So it is that hybrid model, but we do bring them all into Atlanta, which I think continues to just set the importance of, hey, we're investing in you as our leaders. You are the front lines. You are the people that our employees spend 40 hours a week with. And so we've really prioritized that investment too.
Love it. Lightning in a bottle. Right. I heard a leader share with me that they try to re-recruit their employees every day, right? Creating that new first day experience. Donald, Jeff, any thoughts in terms of the leadership development, how you're continuing to make sure that your culture, your values are part of that?
Yeah, I didn't realize the amount of similarities between Salesloft and Greenhouse. You mentioned 5 dysfunction of a team. You mentioned radical candor. I think we very much have a speak up culture at Greenhouse. And so like we do Ask Me Anythings, which are AMAs where literally like our leaders, including our founders, are on the hot seat and we get questions from the company. And we have found like that level of transparency allows us to maintain our values of being purposeful, belonging, and entrepreneurship because many of the questions are rooted through those lenses. I think the other thing that we do, you mentioned radical candor, we do radical candor as well, where my CEO, who I report to, will actually meet with my directs and then ask some questions, anonymize the feedback, provide it to me in a one-on-one, and then I have an action to make sure I deliver to them. This is what I heard, and this is what I'm gonna do. And that level, I think of, I don't wanna use the word checks and balances, because it's probably not best to get political right now. But ideally, I think what we found is like that level of connection and transparency is huge. I think the other thing though is like, we create and nurture this culture where we can fail. So like one of the biggest things that we did this year was we announced an enhancement to our sabbatical program where historically, if you did 7 years of service, you got 7 weeks off. And what we found is like 85% of our organization was actually less than 4 years and 10 years. So similar to you, hiring like hundreds of people over the last year. And so we were like, oh, we got to like change this. So we changed it to 4 years to 4 weeks of service. And like 85% of the organization got excited and 15% was like, what are you doing? And so what we found is like they provided feedback and then we went and enhanced it. So the folks that were more tenured were grandfathered and they got the same amount of weeks at a certain point in their career. But I think that level of like bias towards action based on their feedback, I think that gives them the nurturing that they need So when we go to like look at things like development or maintaining the culture, it's pretty good. The other thing we did was hired a VP of development who starts December 5th, Will Leahy. So I'm excited about him and really doing some of the work that you all are doing there at Salesloft around like what are the actual fundamental guardrails we're going to do around accelerating the growth of people.
Love it. Jeff, any thoughts or experiences?
Yeah, Donald, you said two things there. You talked about candor and transparency. And, it's interesting in my career, every company I've been in, they do employee surveys. And I've always found like the number one thing employees complain about besides compensation is I feel like I don't know what's going on. Like that seems to be like this constant theme. Like I work for this company and I don't know what the department I sit next to is doing. I don't understand the business results. And I think that's kind of a drag on employee engagement overall, like lack of transparency. And so, one of the things we try to do is almost overwhelm our employees with transparency. So we would have a weekly newsletter that would go out every week, just here highlights of things going around the company. We would do usually an every other week all hands meeting where we share results going on around the company. We have company news channels on Slack. Like there's no way, I wanted to take that away as an excuse. Like there's no way you as an employee, we send out our daily numbers to all the employees. Like you could see exactly the transaction volume, across the country with ParkMobile. So no excuse. And I actually think that really helped get people more engaged in the overall business, because you see people who are in human resources or operations, asking questions around like, oh, why were the metrics in Philadelphia down last night, right? You have people asking about, in the technology team asking why, how was the performance of a particular marketing campaign? And I think that's really healthy for organizations when you share more. And it's scary sometimes, like during COVID, our numbers were terrible, but we still shared them, right? Because we wanted people to know what was going on. But I think that is like the most important thing that leadership has to promote is just an open environment, a transparent environment where you're sharing, yes, you're sharing the wins, but you're also sharing challenges. And when people see that, they see that the organization is kind of being honest and upfront with them. It creates more of an attachment and be like, okay, I trust these guys. Like they're telling me what's going on. And again, that's a great driver of overall employee engagement for a company.
Yeah, love the story about having courage to share keep the transparency even when it's not the story you want to necessarily share. So, okay, final question. We're going to open up to the audience here. So, one of the things on the Great Retention that we want to do is we want to make it practical. Meaning, is there a lesson learned, practical piece of advice that leaders in this audience can take away and implement in their team? Right? So as you're thinking about next year, what's your number one priority when it comes to employee experience, employee engagement? Is there a practical piece of advice, lesson learned, that you can share with the audience, both virtually as well as here in person? And Donald, I'll put you on the spot.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is good. What I would say is that there are a number of universal languages out there. Music is a universal language. Food is a universal language. I'm partial to ice cream. I think ice cream is a universal language. One of the universal languages, though, I would leave you with is allyship. And when I say allyship, a lot of people are like, oh, I heard that term before, but like, Donald, like, what do you mean by it? And like, there's 4 stages of allyship, in my opinion. The first one is like inviting. And that's something all of you can do at your companies respectively. When's the last time you invited someone that you don't work with on a normal basis? But inviting is not enough. The second thing you have to do is support them. So when's the last time you supported somebody in your workplace? But support is not enough. After you invite or you support them, you have to engage them continuously. And like, when's the last time you engage someone continuously in the workplace? The last one I think is really big, which is champion. And when I say champion someone, I mean like you have to like shepherd their success. I have the honor to have one of my favorite heads of HR, my favorite head of HR that I reported to, actually in the crowd. His name is Gerald Heal. And there's no way I would have been where I am today had he not championed me. So like I would tell each of you, there's a responsibility that you have to champion folks. And you don't have to just champion folks that look like you. In fact, I would say the most beautiful form of allyship is championing people who are actually different from you or your perceived differences that you may have. So that would be my 4 practical things for you: allyship, universal language, champion people.
Love it. Love it. Katie.
Man, that's tough to follow. The one thing that we're really focused on next year is intentionality. And I think as so many companies, I mean, just thinking about, LinkedIn today, so many companies are doing more with less people, less resources. It's being intentional about the things that you choose to do and really executing them with excellence. So for us, the big things are connection, which we've talked about, and continuing our culture. But I think transparency is just as important, and one of the things that we're focused on, exactly like Jeff mentioned, the transparency around our numbers are shared, our all hands communications, just being intentional with the information that we share with our employees are 2 of the things that we're really focused on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be very specific here in things that I think, I don't know if you guys do this, but during COVID, we lost a fair amount of people from our company. They resigned, they went and got jobs, like crazy pay increases, and you never lose the people you want to lose. You always lose like the best people, right? That's the thing that always sucks. Is like your favorite people tend to leave because they're awesome, and then when awesome people get opportunities, and I realized that we didn't have a real process for when people left the company. It was very kind of cookie cutter. You submit a letter, you go to your exit interview, and you're off. And so for people that were top performers who were leaving the company, I personally made it a point to reach out to them and talk to them. Not to try to save them, because they had already decided they were going to leave, but one, to kind of understand really what's going on here? Why'd you leave? Is there anything we could have done differently? And there's a big difference when the CEO does that sometimes, and not to say that you guys should do that too, but when the CEO does that, they're like, oh, I can't believe it. And I told them in my conversation that, listen, I'm sure it's an awesome opportunity for you, and I'm sure you're going to do great. But if it's not what you expect, call me. And we had 4 people that called me. So in the last 12 months, we had 4 boomerangs. And nothing gets the organization more excited than someone who is awesome coming back. They saw what the grass is like on the other side, not so green. I'm coming back to ParkMobile. And so I think thinking about, I know this is the great retention, but inevitably you're going to lose some people. Thinking about what your strategy is for when people walk out the door, the good people walk out the door, and being very purposeful and thinking that maybe we can get them back in the next 6 or 12 months. Because if they do come back, it is a huge shot in the arm for the organization and something that will get everyone else excited. It also shows the people that are there, oh shit, maybe I shouldn't leave because Joy left and she came right back. So it's a scary world out there. So that's the kind of thing I think about your re-recruitment strategy, how you orchestrate it when people are out, how you get senior leadership involved in it, because it really is huge if you can get people that are great back into the organization.
Yeah, that's a cool story. So before we open it up to the audience, can we please give a round of applause for our speakers here tonight? Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights. Really appreciate that. Yeah. So Jeff, we'll open up to questions. Anyone, just raise your hand, and I think we'll have a mic going around, and we also can open it up for folks online. We've got a question right here.
Hi there. A great panel. Wonderful, wonderful topics. Thank you so much for your words. I'm Tim Huff from TurkNet Leadership Group, and I love what you mentioned about leadership development, because that truly is my passion as a leader. I'm curious, for your leadership development programs that you have, how big of an impact is that truly having on retention, and And actually, more importantly, on recruitment. Are candidates actually excited about the things that you're doing with leadership development, and how big of an impact is that truly having?
Yeah, I think that our leaders, we talk about it during the recruiting process. So if we're recruiting new managers, we talk about the program that they're going to go through. I think the biggest impact is felt, though, when there's consistency across the organization. And we know that our managers on the engineering team are having this conversations the same way as our managers in sales or in finance or HR. And that goes down to from everything from a one-on-one to how to have conflict. That's one of the biggest things that we focus on, whether it's conflict with somebody on your team that reports to you or your boss or a peer or someone in a different department. How do you work through that? And so being able to level set the organization and have everyone speak the same language of, hey, that's not how we do this, we do it this way, has been really helpful.
I feel like between my co-founders, Sawar and Prim, we're really good at having conflict. So we can share some learnings on that.
Hey, good afternoon, or almost evening. Thank you so much for the shout out, Donald. I'm Gerald Hill. I'm the head of global talent acquisition at Fiserv. Great panel, great discussion, great insight shared. Thinking about the notion of intentionality, right? You've got the proactive, we're going to plan and deliberately focus on this because we need something to change. Then you've got the reactive. There was an inflection point, right, that occurred that says we have to do something different, right? And so thinking about this concept of culture and how you all have been really purposeful in driving that. I'm curious about that frontline kind of mid-level leadership level where change tends to be the toughest, right? Because they have, that individual contributor kind of focus in doing their job, but they're also responsible in leading others, right? And so just curious about what you all have done or seen that's led to, successfully enabling those individuals as culture carriers as much as your senior leadership.
That's a great question. I'll take a stab at it first. That I would say that, so typically we have three types of folks. We have experts, which most people call frontline or individual contributors. We have management, and then we have executives. And you're spot on, Gerald. Like, management has the most difficult job because what ends up happening is, like, if you look at their job through the lens of being strategic, tactical, and even technical in nature, they're often operationalizing a strategy that they did not necessarily influence or create. One of the things that we've done is, I will give a shout out to Michelle Fox, who's the CPO at Life Labs, also based here in the great city of Atlanta. They have a phenomenal new hire and middle manager curriculum. And every year we look at all of the things from a development perspective to see what do we need to start, stop, continue. That is by far the most praised thing by any leader of people at Greenhouse. And so I'm happy to connect anybody here with Michelle. She will prioritize you and give you Greenhouse VIP treatment. But I think that they cracked the code on how do you equip multiple leaders from different backgrounds who may not have the same default habits and behaviors and put them through the certain level of rigor to make sure that everybody comes out of this program, if you will, operating at a certain level where they can be more conducive to change. So Life Labs, that's who I would encourage you to call, Michelle Fox. She's amazing.
So we would try to, you have to do a lot of the foundational work around career pathing in different functions. It's really important. So you're clearly saying, okay, you go from your marketing assistant, then you can go to a marketing manager, and then you can go here or here, and being very clear with employees on what their potential path could be within the organization. And then the key is getting the leaders, the bosses, to have the ongoing check-ins with them on their career pathing and their goals. And also equipping them with the tools to have the tough conversations around, maybe you're better as an individual contributor versus a manager. And you see this a lot. I've managed a lot of salespeople in my career, and every salesperson thinks they want to be a sales manager, sales director, chief revenue officer. Sometimes the worst sales managers are the best salespeople, right? Like the worst sales managers are the best salespeople. And so you have to have leadership that's able to kind of say to a good sales, like, hey, if you want to be a sales manager, I'll support you. But understand these are the trade-offs. Like the best salespeople sometimes make a lot less money, or the best sales managers sometimes make a lot less money than the best salespeople. So it's equipping the team to have those career pathing discussions, and making sure they understand, listen, not everyone could be, it's a pyramid. Not everyone could be a director, VP. That doesn't mean you can't have a great career here as an individual contributor. So I think that's the key is, one, showing what a career path looks like, and then two, making sure you're having those frequent discussions on how the career path is going. Because, sometimes, if someone really wants to be a manager but it's not in the cards, they're probably better off leaving, the organization to find that opportunity elsewhere if you don't think they could do it in your company.
Yep.
That was a great panel. Thank you. So Jeff said this, but I think this is sort of directed at all three of you. But you talked about how I think this is Jeff's words, baked your values into your hiring process. Can you go into that a little bit and explain how you guys did that? Because that's something I think would be really interesting to understand how you can sort of interview and pull that out of people during the interview process.
Yeah, so when you go and evaluate a candidate, the questions that we give the interviewees get to the core values. So it's important that if you're going to interview a candidate, there are certain questions we would like you to ask that will get back to the core values. And then everyone's required, I think this is all done in Greenhouse, everyone's required to do the kind of the post-interview evaluation. And so when we set up the post-interview evaluation, we specifically asked, did this person deliver on these core values, right? So it's totally baked into the interview process. It's also baked into the review process when you're doing your end-of-year review for bonuses or merit increases. It's there too. What did you do to live up to these core values? So it's totally embedded. We called it the core value awards every year. So we award people who embody the core values of each core value of the organization, and we recognize them in front of their peers. But when you do those kind of things, it's so funny, like, I feel like everyone in our organization, your organization sounds similar, they know the core values by heart. And that's really cool. Like when you could, on the spot, people will tell you each core value and it becomes just part of the vernacular of how you work. Then you've kind of done it right.
Ours is baked in a little bit differently. So we have a separate interview in our process. That is our core values interview. So each candidate at every level in the organization goes through a core values interview. They meet with 2 people in the organization. They have to have been with Salesloft for 6 months. They get nominated to be a part of the core values interview team. And then they have a 30-minute interview. It is people from 2 different departments that the individual will not work in, so that they're not also assessing them for technical skill set or do I want to work with this person. Then we also make sure that it's 1 male and 1 female, just so that it's an inclusive process. So they go through that, and they're all based on similar behavioral interview questions to assess, hey, is this person embody the values? And the second part of that that's so impactful is the message that it sends to the organization and to the candidates of how much we invest in the time to go through this process. We hired 400 plus people this year, and every single one of them had that extra step. So it's a huge investment, but it also continues to reinforce it for current employees and then the candidates as they go through the process.
I mean, my response is rather easy. I would say ditto _ retweet to everything they just said. Despite approaching it differently, essentially what they're telling you is that the values are baked into the hiring process, right? And I always tell people, if you want to know if your organization lives your values, just ask them what the values are. If they don't know your values, there's opportunities for improvement for your organization to live them out better. And the easiest way to make sure it's baked in is on the front end when people experience you through the hiring process. For us at Greenhouse, we do actually map all of our questions to values. The reason why is, like, when you look at some of the candidate survey, people are actually asked some very illegal and atrocious questions during their interviews at some companies. And so our thought process is, if we said our values are most important, that should be what we're actually measuring. We shouldn't be measuring what school you went to, or who do you know at the local country club or social hour. Like, that's not as important for us at Greenhouse. The other thing I think is rather beautiful is like everybody at our company, we all share one thing in common. We all went through that same process. So despite our backgrounds, we all have that same moment in the process where we were like, yeah, like I want to be part of this organization. And I think it's actually true, a true testament to the values that we hope to live out. So we can bake it into your hiring process. I'll make sure I connect with you afterwards. That's.
Give an example of how, like a value in a question that you tied together?
Yeah, so our three values: belonging, purpose, entrepreneurship. And so we'll ask someone, like, if you disagreed with someone, I'm sure you disagreed with somebody in your past, like, if purpose is important to you and like meaningful connection is important to you, like, tell me, how did you live out purpose and still reach some level of conclusion in a relationship where you saw things differently? And you'll find out rather quickly how purposeful people are. Many of the folks that we opt not to actually bring to Greenhouse is because when they respond to that question, they immediately go to defense mode. They don't live out a value of purpose. And what we have found is like many of the people that do actually join, like they can articulate very clearly how, no, I'm still a purposeful person. Like I assume good intent and I try to help people understand a different perspective. So we like map it there. The other thing I would tell people is one of the most inclusive allyship examples of living that value out is we all, and I'm curious to see if you both do this. We have it baked in the software, but I'm curious, hate to put you on the spot. But like we do roundups at the end of our interviews. And so there's plenty of people that have joined Greenhouse that they might not have got all yeses, but during the roundup is where we're actually calibrating on, well, why do you think that that's actually a knock on their candidacy, or what were you hoping to look for? Because when I hear that, this is what I hear. And that is my favorite part about the interview process is the roundup, because you get to hear so many different perspectives that, myself included, I have actually shifted my position on candidates who have gone on to do some of the most meaningful work at Greenhouse because of someone else helping me see something that might have been an obstructed view for me in their candidacy. So we do roundups. If you don't do roundups, I would encourage you to do so. But I don't know if you two do them at Salesloft or ParkMobile, respectively.
We don't do them the way you just described.
Okay.
All right, we got time for one more question here from the audience.
Hi, my name is Seth Freeman, and it's good to be here. Great conversation tonight. I'll start by saying, Jeff and Donald, I love your hair. It's beautiful. Secondly, I hate the notion or idea of quiet quitting, but I'm super interested in, as leaders, should we just expect that folks are just going to give the bare minimum in this generation, or should we push them for more? Or how are you guys dealing with that? Thank you very much.
Oh, I love to take this one. I don't know you, but I'm so glad you asked that question. This idea of framing generations' habits against other generations is something that I find just utterly repulsive. Because each generation has their own sets of qualms, and it just so happens that we have technology where we can actually hear about some of the qualms of this generation. The second thing I would say is we shouldn't get mad at candidates or talent who do quiet quitting when we have quiet leadership. So like, if you're not going to be bold and intentional in the way that you advocate for others and the way you champion others, how dare you ask, not you specifically, but like, how dare we
Give me the mic. Give me the mic.
I'm asking for a friend. Oh, I got you. But honestly though, how dare we get mad at folks that then quietly quit an organization who those organizations in many ways are like quietly leading. They are failing on these opportunities that they have to be intentional. And I don't think that that's generational. I think the difference is, I tell my parents this all the time, like this new generations are their kids and their grandkids. And so what has happened is they've had a front row seat to seeing what happens to their parents and their aunts and their uncles when these companies have like legitimately failed them, where they have been in suffocating environments. And so what they're saying is, no, I'm opting into something differently. ParkMobile didn't tell me to say this, but I'll say it on behalf of Jeff. You should be very intentional about where you park your time, talent, and treasure. And I'm sorry, some companies are just not worthy of the time, talent, and treasure that I'm willing to offer based on the way their lack of leadership is showing up on a day-to-day basis. And so I think companies have to actually flip the conversation and be like Katie and be like Jeff, which is, despite us seeing the world slightly differently and operationalizing great leadership very differently in our organizations, what I love about both of these individuals is that they're very intentional and they're willing to do the work. A lot of leaders aren't willing to do the work, and thusly their candidates or their people are willing to quit on them. And so it's on us. What should leaders be doing to champion an environment where quiet quitting is not even present? It's a different spin on the question, but I think what happens is like leaders have gotten comfortable with not being intentional. And so if you're not going to be intentional, don't get mad when someone wants to park their time, talent, and treasure at a different organization. Woo! Sorry.
Katie, Jeff, anything you want to add on that? Oxygen in the room, you know?
Yeah, I've been working at small companies, and like my last company was about 100 people, ParkMobile 225. It's really hard to quiet quit in a company that's that small because you're super lean, and people who can't keep up just check out. So it's the benefit of being at a small company is it's really hard to quiet quit just because everyone will see it in full view. But when I was at bigger companies, it's a significant issue. And I think, there's tons of people, you always see, they're waiting for the pension, and so how do organizations deal with it? I think it's like, you got to have very engaged managers who are on it. That's the only thing that's going to stop it. Because if someone has quiet quit and their manager knows it and is letting it go on, that's kind of an indictment of the manager, because that person just needs to be moved out. And so I'm always a fan, like when we went through the COVID year, we looked across the entire organization, because when like our revenue went down 95% overnight, we said, all right, who can we get rid of in the organization because we have to save money? Like are there people we can cut? And there were some low performers, but each leader kind of went down their org chart and said, I can't afford to lose this person. I can't afford to lose this person. I can't afford to lose this person. So we ended up not cutting anybody except the people that were already on performance improvement plans. So they were already being managed out of the organization. But it made us realize, like, oh, we have to do that exercise more often, even when we're not in COVID, right? And we have to go through our organization and make sure, is everyone pulling their weight? Is everyone kind of engaged? Is everyone there? Because if they're not, you start to have to make some tough decisions on, well, do we need that head? Maybe we don't need that head. Or maybe just we need that head, but we need a different person in that seat.
The only thing I would add is I would ask your friend why people are quiet quitting in their organization, and kind of work back into what are you missing? So from a leadership standpoint, or from just the way your organization is set up, thinking about employee engagement is great. I think we need to push past just engaging employees and make sure that they're fulfilled. And I think employee fulfillment comes through different things like connection. If you think back to the very classic like Gallup HR survey, the question that everyone makes fun of, do I have a best friend at work? It's really asking, are you connected to someone at work? And do you have relationships? So are they fulfilled? Do they have relationships at work? Do they feel like they have opportunities to grow? Does their manager believe in them? I think it's all of those things. And if one or multiple of those components are missing, then people are gonna either quiet quit or really quit. And so I think asking and understanding why are they doing that is where you have to start.
Okay, so we could keep going, but we do have a lot of wine and beer we need to drink because we don't want to take it out of here. So we've got about 30 minutes or so. Jeff, Katie, and Donald, thank you. Thank you for being willing just to share your insight, your experiences. It means so much. And our hope, again, is that you're able to take some of these insights and apply it to your teams, right? Apply it to your organization. We are going to put a code up on the screen here. You actually, for anyone HR professional, you get SHRM credit for being here tonight and using this code. These wonderful leaders are going to hang out for a little bit afterwards. So if you have some questions, feel free to come up to them and pick their brain a little bit more. And but yeah, really appreciate you all coming, and everyone online virtually for joining as well. And one more round of applause for our leaders today.